participators, thank you. And some who I think this is your first time joining us. So I hope that you enjoy and benefit from today's presentation and that you will come back for more. Let me give you a brief highlight as to what we have on store for next week. On Monday, we have Dave Loomis of Loomis Marketing looking at customer outreach strategies. And I know Dave is with us today. Hi, Dave. We have June Ryan, another Rear Admiral from the Coast Guard, along with Mr. Parks, who will be speaking to us on Tuesday with leadership strategies for how to increase team productivity in this time. I think something we can all benefit from. Wednesday, Jason Therion of ThunderTech will be joining us to talk about how to engage consumers and how to communicate with them during these times. And Thursday, something for everyone, Jennifer Borovica talking about to us and with us about self-care and wellness. So hope you can join us for one of those next week. Today, we're thrilled to welcome our friends from Business Volunteers Unlimited, a good partner of Cleveland Leadership Center. Biz Voudouris, currently EVP, but as we all know, she will soon be taking the helm there. She has been at BVU now for over 27 years. Biz, I don't think you're old enough to have been at work for that long. She oversees BVU's nonprofit consulting center and has been critical and instrumental in developing training, consulting, and executive coaching for our nonprofit community. She has served on the board of Laurel School and Campus International School Advisory Board, and if I have this correctly, you're currently on the board of the Akron Zoological Park. Is that right, Biz? Yeah, very cool.
Yes, and the Museum of Natural History too, actually.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
And Brian Broadbent, who is serving as president and CEO of BVU. Brian works with businesses to develop and implement strategies for their community involvement, and his board service is long. I'll just give you a few highlights. He served on the boards of City Mission, YOU, where he served for many years as board chair, St. Ed's High School, and the Commission for Economic Inclusion. So we have heard so much about how to guide nonprofits during this time, and Brian and Biz, we're thrilled to have you step it up to the board level and educate all of us as to how boards can better help our nonprofits and guide them through to a successful conclusion to the pandemic. So I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
No, Mary Ann, thank you very much. I just want to start, or we want to start thanking you and Rachel for having us here to be able to do this. It's a real privilege. And just, looking at the group of people that are here, a lot of you know boards, you work with boards. You're either business leaders, you've been on boards, or you're nonprofit leaders, you deal with boards, or you're considering being a board member. And so for those that have been providing board service, thank you for your work in doing that. It's great. It's interesting with this, putting this in context, because what Mary Ann and Rachel asked us to do is, we're in this crisis right now, but we want to talk about boards in this crisis, but we also want to talk about boards and their roles coming out of it. And so that's what we're going to do. And Biz and I are going to split this presentation. We just don't know how long things are going to last, right? It's a big unknown for all of us. But at some point, things will settle. We'll hit a new normal, and we're going to want to think of that. And so you can ask questions in the chat room. Rachel's going to capture those and feed those to us along the way, because there's about 50 plus that are on the call right now. So that's the best way to do it. So here are the takeaways of what we're going to talk about. Nonprofits need strong, engaged boards now more than ever. And we're going to be very specific what that means, what we think boards should be focused on. Second, boards really have to ask tough questions and make some tough decisions with the senior staff in the situation. And something a lot of people are hesitant to talk about is collaborations and strategic alliances. But we want to kind of pitch, just talk to you about that and some thoughts around that, because we've done some work in that space. So Biz, with that, why don't you take it away?
Thank you. And thanks again to Rachel and Mary Ann and the Leadership Center for this topic is just so important to us, obviously. And thanks to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us here today. And this topic, it's on our minds anyways, but a couple of weeks ago, we did a survey of there are a lot of national surveys right now, but we wanted to know how our local nonprofit sector was doing. So we did a survey of our local nonprofit partners and got about 75 responses. And, we'll just share some of these responses with you because I think it really sets the tone. But they tell the story, and it's obvious to everybody that our nonprofit sector is dealing with tremendous strategic and financial pressures right now. And I think looking at this illustrates how very important the board's role really is. So on the first question we asked is, has this crisis impacted your ability to deliver your mission? 89% said yes. 11% said no, which is interesting, but 89% said yes. And one quote that somebody wrote, "This has completely removed all traditional means of delivering our mission to the community." I mean, it's changed everything for some nonprofits, and you can't just change on a dime. So that's powerful. The other response, we had about 12 questions, I think, but the one that really grabbed me is that 68% of the respondents said that their board is helping them address the crisis. And you might say, oh, great, 68%. When I saw it, I said, oh my gosh, what about those poor nonprofits whose boards aren't helping them address them through this crisis? But a few folks gave examples. Some said, yeah, we've got a COVID task force, or we've got the boards meeting monthly. One person wrote in their response, the vice chairs are pitching in by calling donors and thanking them, and our other board members are writing thank you notes to all donors. So it's something, and it's kind of building that traction. But the bottom line from this question is that I think that should say 100%. That should be an easy 100%. So that was a little bit surprising to me. Some of the other questions that we asked, are you planning on furloughing or laying off any employees? Only 25% at this point said, we're going to do the survey again in a couple of weeks, and we'll see if that changes. Several commented not yet, but only 25% at this point have done that. We asked if you've had to stop providing any of your services, and 73% said yes. Some of the, our cultural organizations are completely closed, other organizations not providing one or two services. We asked if they were facing, fundraising challenges and canceling their fundraising events. And, almost 80% said, yes, they were canceling their fundraising events. And, 70%, 80% said that they applied for the SBA or the PPP loan. And I just saw a statistic out today that about 59% of the nonprofits nationally that applied for the loans got them. So, that almost half didn't, 40% didn't get them. And finally, and in that one, we also asked, actually, are you predicting the impact on your revenues? And most of them said yes, and they ranged from 20 to 80% off, but several said that their revenues this year were going to be up to 80% off. So again, that's alarming for some of these organizations. And then finally, we asked, do you think your organization is going to look the same in 1 year? And 78% said no. And one of the takeaways, one of the comments was, we will be doing differently with a lot less. So I think it speaks to the world is very different, and it is a critical time for the board to really lean it, really engage and get the governance right for their organization. And Rachel, you had a quick poll that we were going to take just to find out how many of you are board members. So do you want to do that? So if you want to just. Thank you. So about half of you serve on boards, almost half are staff, and many of you are both. So yeah, so you're wearing both hats, which is, thanks, Rachel. I appreciate that, just to get a sense of who's here. So now what do I do so that I can go on to the next page? Let's see. There we go. So you all know, and again, most of you are, many of you are board members, but we wanted to just frame up this conversation. These are always the responsibilities. We've got the 7 and the role of the board training that we do a couple times a year. We always talk about the 7 basic responsibilities of any nonprofit board. And so these still stand true. But in a crisis like this, it's really important for you think about your board. You've got people on your board, hopefully bring unique perspective and networks and expertise. Think of them as your brain trust, and you want to engage your brain trust in figuring out how to navigate these challenges. So the first critical point is the mission, and just keeping the mission and the values of your organization at the center. And that's so important for the board to help do. And then second, your board members are some of your best ambassadors. And I think it would be great if every nonprofit organization just gave their board an elevator speech for right now. What is it that we're doing either to survive or to help or to, and something, or what can we say to our donors or our stakeholders right now, and give the board that role as ambassadors for your organization so that they can do something to, just keep your organization front of mind for people in the community. And I think another critical role for the board right now is just to support that chief executive. I just got an email 20 minutes ago from somebody saying this is so hard. And so often the chief executive can't say that. They're trying to lead the staff and be strong. And this is really hard work. So supporting your chief executive and prioritizing the health and safety of your employees. Another critical role for the board right now is just to try to ensure the financial stability of the organization. And then finally, just not forgetting that developing the board is actually the board's job. It's not the staff's role. That's the board's responsibility. So for the board to think about how do we keep our board engaged, don't wait for the CEO to call you. How can we keep the board engaged, helping people be better ambassadors, or, whatever role the board can play. So bottom line with any board now or at any time is that the board is ultimately responsible for the sustainability of the nonprofit. It's not the CEO, it's not the board chair or the executive committee in most cases. It's the board as a whole, as a unit. So the board needs to figure out what its role is at this time to really support the nonprofit organization. So we've kind of outlined it in an approach in 4 different steps, and Brian and I are going to walk through it. And the first is just really making sure that the board is engaged, because again, the buck stops with the board. The board is responsible for the organization right now. So making sure that the board is engaged in helping the chief executive and the staff navigate through this challenge. And I think that starts with the board chair reaching out to the chief executive and engaging as a partner with the chief executive to say, what can we do? How can, what can the board do to help you now? What would be most helpful? Something else that a lot of nonprofits are doing, and hopefully yours is one of them, is activating a committee, whether it's, for some it's the full board, for others it's the executive committee. Many have a COVID task force, but activating some committee that's just looking out at a very high level for at least the financial sustainability and the financial scenarios, but also the mission and the people, but, focusing on that. And then decide what the frequency is. Should the board, maybe your board meets quarterly, and it takes a lot of work to get ready for a good board meeting, but should there be a board call once a month right now? Maybe it's not even a meeting, but how often should the board engage so that they're supportive to the staff, certainly, but also so that they're informed, because again, they're ultimately responsible. Oh my gosh, my dogs, I'm so sorry. And then that ongoing communication with the full board.
Can I mention something while your dogs are barking, Biz?
Yeah.
On the city mission board right now, we have a no agenda meeting where we call the board together. The CEO can talk about whatever he'd like to, Rich Trickle, but it just gives the board an update. And really the CEO, maybe the CFO will talk a little bit, but the board can pop questions, and it just keeps them in the loop of whatever's going on during this crisis. And we have board meetings every other month, so it's nice to supplement those with these off-month discussions, just like you're talking about.
That's a great. And the bottom line is we're all chasing a moving target. Nobody's got the answer right now. So just having, set the cadence, whatever it is. You're not trying to burden your staff, but making sure that the board is informed and engaged, and hopefully you're really tapping into the talent on your board to help provide support and move the organization forward. So engaging, making sure, and then also making sure that the board really owns that they're, it's our job to protect that mission, to protect the core of what we do, and especially given, decreasing resources. What is it that you really need to preserve? Whether it's taking instruction online, which I know Jerry's on the call. I know they've gone to almost as much, bringing as much online as they can, so they're still delivering their mission. Other organizations are trying to figure out how to get the food to the children who are no longer in the schools. So that's preserving the mission. But if you can't continue to deliver the mission, what else, is there anything else that you should stop doing maybe because you can't be doing it now? So I think for the board to really say, what is our core purpose? And it's a good time to think about, is it still relevant? Is there anybody else we could be partnering with to deliver this service? And we actually have a a grid that we use when we're looking, and it's something that maybe you would do during strategic planning, but maybe it's something to think about now. And you think about it, for example, a homeless shelter, they're not charging their clients. If they were charging their clients, if it wasn't a third party, they were charging the clients, they would be a hotel, right? So some of your programs are not going to generate their own revenues, and you know that, and that's just part of your mission. But how are you sustaining them? And is there a real plan to sustain those programs that aren't generating revenues? So just evaluating each of your programs. Is it critical to the mission? You know, what's the earned revenue for this particular program? What's the expense, profit and loss? And then if it's not, and then, you know, is there another way that you could deliver this program, or we are absolutely committed to this program, it's core to our mission, but we need to subsidize it with something else. But really understanding this right now, because you might identify a few things that maybe you don't need to do for a little while as the resources become limited and constricted. And then, Brian, I'll turn it over to you for the next slide.
Got it. Thanks, Biz. You know, so this is a quote, and basically, you know, what it's saying is, you know, boards often look at the current financial situation, they do their audits, they look backward, but this is a point that the boards need to look forward. And I know a lot of your organizations, and you're very well run, but they really need to look forward now, kind of to Biz's point, and you know, do a lot of scenario planning, which we're going to talk about right now. And it's interesting, 3/4 of nonprofits right now are in the middle of doing scenario planning and getting them updated. So I'll tell you a little story, you know, about BVU. When we had the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, you know, we didn't know what was going to happen with our revenue. You know, we were worried foundation funders could decide health and human services are more important than a BVU type organization. Businesses would retrench, they wouldn't have people volunteering. And so we did some very serious scenario planning at that point, and effectively had a plan that was pretty much said, we're not going to have staff raises, which we implemented. We had to reduce expenses, direct non-payroll expenses where we could, which we implemented. I would take the first pay cut as the CEO and have a higher percentage pay cut than anybody else. The staff would then take a pay cut. And then if we had to, after that, we would reduce headcount. And we kind of had those steps. And the thought was, depending how deep it went with the financial crisis, we would go down those different steps. And then after things started to get better, we'd go back up, bottom up. Staff would get their raises back, then me, and you know, we would do all that. Now it's interesting with the COVID crisis. You know, the key is, and I'll just give you our situation. Right now, we are in a cash situation. We're pretty good shape for 4 to 5 months. We were able to get the SBA loan. We've accelerated some foundation grants, that type of thing. But what's going to happen after that is really the key. And that's where the scenario planning really comes into place. This is, if you can hit the next slide. And this is a grid from the Nonprofit Finance Fund. Sorry, it's so busy, but basically it looks at the budget, you know, your forecast, and then you start laying out your scenarios. And we've done the same thing at BVU. And the problem is forecasting really is impossible, because we just don't know how deep this is going to go and how our revenue streams are going to be impacted. So number one, we know that depending on what happens with revenue, we have to pull different levers like what I just outlined in 2008, 2009. And we've got those levers identified. About 3 weeks ago, we had already done our scenario planning, and we assumed a reduction of 10, 20, or 30% of revenue. And all those scenarios are already out the window. 10% is too low, 30% needs to be adjusted. We're now looking at 2 scenarios, a 15% loss of revenue and 30+% loss of revenue. And that one could go up. But the point here is that we are watching real carefully all of our revenue streams, from business membership, our consulting fees, all of those types of things, to see how they're impacted. And every executive committee meeting, board meeting, we're going to give the board updates on where we are on each of these. And the other thing Biz just mentioned, we have to understand the P&L, kind of a set P&L for each of our program areas. And we have 6 of them at BVU. Some lose money, and there's reasons why we want to invest in those. And others make money, but we have to take a hard look at that. And I hope you're doing the same, because I'm guessing the 3/4 of nonprofits, and knowing some of the leaders on the call here, you've probably done some of this. But if you ever need help, we have pro bono consultants that can help with this type of stuff. And I just want to make sure you know that's available to you. If you go to the next slide, this is now kind of defining the new normal. And, you know, the tough questions, the board, getting back to the board, what the board needs to ask, and the board has to worry about that scenario planning too, is strategic restructuring. What are you doing with headcount? You know, furloughs, layoffs, those are the obvious things. And the things we talked about, if there isn't quite as much mission alignment with a service offering, is it time to jettison that or have it go to another nonprofit? Back office expenses, is there a way to share costs with that, reduce those expenses, things that aren't directly to the program. So this is kind of a view internally to the nonprofits. This, if you can go to the next slide. So then this is more the external view, and it's considering collaborations. Actually, next week, we're doing a presentation with the Cleveland Foundation that goes into more detail on this. But this is the time for boards to think about strategic alliances. And my advice would be anytime you're doing strategic planning, like if you're doing strategic planning every 3 or 4 years, you should always ask, is there some sort of alliance that you should have with another nonprofit? And we've all heard the same thing. You know, people will kind of grouse that, oh, there's so many nonprofits and shouldn't they come together? Well, there are reasons for that, but still it's a chance to step back when you're doing strategy, reevaluate it. And it's especially important to do it now when there's financial pressure. And you'll see this kind of this picture of potential alliances here in a minute. The last point is really important with this COVID crisis. You know, our sense is, and what we're hearing is a lot of nonprofits are going to burn cash quickly. And if you want to be a very favorable partner in a collaboration or whatever, people want to know that you're sound financially. I hope this isn't the case, but my sense is a lot of nonprofits are going to try to fight their way through. They're going to see their cash is getting depleted, they're getting weak, and they're going to say, hey, I think it's time for me to merge with somebody. At that point, you're not a viable merger partner. People don't want to see it. And I can think of a story where we, you know, Biz and I consult on mergers. We've done probably 10 plus of these over time where we do a feasibility study, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But one nonprofit approached and said, you know, we're thinking about merging. I'd like to approach this group. We go, well, that's fine, you know, approach them. But we started asking questions. And we said, you know what, how do the programs align? How do the cultures align? And tell us about your cash situation. And that was like, well, we don't have a lot of money. That's part of the reason we're looking at it. And it was like, they probably missed the boat, you know, and in the end, nothing really happened from that discussion because they weren't a strong organization. So we can go to the next slide, Biz. So, you know, there are a lot of, like we said before, it's almost at any time, it's a good time to look at strategic alliances. Certainly when you've got financial challenges, but you want to do it before it gets too deep. When you're looking at your strategy, some sort of a change. But another opportunity is when the CEO or executive director retires, because oftentimes there's a strong leader and there may be hesitation to do it at that point in time. But that is a wonderful time to address another organization that could be someone you could collaborate with. And I think many of you on the phone were around, but do you remember in 2008, 2009, I think it was 2009, Denise Zeman and Deb Vesey brought together 88 nonprofits, and the financial crisis had hit, foundation corpuses dropped, there wasn't going to be as much money to be distributed, and they pulled us all into the room and said, hey, look, there's just not as much money to go around. You really ought to be thinking about collaborations. And then they had 2 organizations talk about a merger they went through to try to eliminate some of the stigma. And I just thought it was really good. In the end, 5 mergers took place out of that. So out of the 88 nonprofits, 10 of them ended up having a merger. But it's the right time to kind of ask the question as a board member. And this, if you go to the next one.
I did.
Yeah.
The next one.
And so, you know, as far as identifying different partners and such, I mean, you can always brainstorm who's a good partner. It's interesting. VVU has been asked, hey, you know the nonprofits. Why don't you recommend mergers? We don't go there. It's not really our place. We're kind of this trusted advisor, and a lot of people don't like that idea of being pushed into a situation. But the boards, the funders, they're the ones that often do some advice like this. But you have to understand kind of your goals for the collaboration. But if you decide to take this step, and this is something we do with feasibility studies at BVU, it doesn't mean you're going to merge or go into a collaboration. It's just doing a study. And so it's kind of a non-threatening way to consider what organizations would look like. And I think what we're going to see in this current environment is we'll see more people interested in this. And that's why I think, Rachel and Mary Ann want us to talk about it even today. So, and it's the board members that can drive that leadership for that. But you could have a task force of 4 board members from the 2 organizations, obviously include the CEOs, do your confidentiality agreements, and do the study. And what the feasibility study looks like is effectively how's the mission align? What program alignment would you have? Take a look at the board construct, staff construct, and org design, and then do a 3-year pro forma financial forecast, that type of stuff. And then the 2 boards can kind of sit back and say, all right, this makes sense, or it doesn't. And we've seen in our consults to go both ways. Sometimes they merge, sometimes they don't. We had one consult that we did, and it was 2 really good organizations. We went through all those steps of the feasibility study. It made sense. The organizations thought it was great. And they were both solid financially. But in the end, there was a cultural hiccup that prevented the 2 from merging. They each had an executive director. One executive director was very operational, kind of a logistics person. The other one was more of a marketing executive director. And the 2 boards could not decide on that top leader, and the thing fell apart. So you never know how it's going to go, but it's at least worth going down the path and doing something.
And I'll just say here, Brian, and I've been pulled into organizations where they merged quickly and then they tried to do the feasibility study, but it's really important to do this first and make sure that it's going to be that on these basic building blocks that you're aligned before, you sign the deal and merge, because it's really hard to bring organizations together on some of these issues after the fact if there's fundamental disagreement.
Well, great point, Biz. Okay, we can go to the next slide, if you would. So a lot of you have probably seen this. This is kind of the spectrum of collaborations. To the left, they're light collaborations. To the right, they're more like mergers and joint ventures. There's much more integration between the 2 organizations. And so there's a whole spectrum of things you could do. And so it's not always the M word. It's not always a merger that organizations are going after, but there could be cost savings with some of the administrative consolidations, even doing some joint programming and sharing information. So you can think about this, all across the spectrum.
And Brian, I'll just mention over here in this column, you might inform the board, but this might be more staff, the staff driven. In this middle column, the board's probably going to approve moving forward in this type of programming, but they're not as involved. Over here, the board's really involved in kind of the feasibility and negotiating whatever the new organization looks like. So if you're a board member, in terms of this is where the board's really involved, and this is more staff driven here, just FYI.
Yeah.
Change the page.
Yep. And the things that tend to break down these collaborations are these things that you can expect. And it's interesting, really the number 1 thing on this list, because culture can throw it off, the financial thing can throw it off. It's a lack of trust. If you have trust between 2 organizations, it can go very well. And I remember Tom Waltermeyer, we merged with the Center for Nonprofit Excellence in 2011 at BVU, and that was an Akron organization. We both served nonprofits in much the same way. We did consulting, a lot of the same seminars, but BVU worked on the business side more. And so C&E was very interested in tapping more into Summit County area businesses and such. For BVU, we were getting a pull that a lot of people wanted to get matched to boards in the southern counties, and businesses wanted us to get involved too to support the Akron area and some of those areas. But it was very interesting to see it. But one of the elements of trust, Tom Waltermeyer helped introduce the idea. He's a board member of ours, in a very gentle way, years before it ever happened, talking to foundations and saying, BVU would like to do some more work in Akron. We're getting pulled south because of our business members and some of the people going through board matching that want to serve on boards in that area. And so we were very forthright, talked to United Way in Summit County, talked to CNE, and then in the end, it brought CNE where they asked us, hey, we'd like to collaborate with the intent to merge, but it was kind of that trust that got established by Tom at the very beginning that was really helpful. So those are pretty much our prepared talks right now, or prepared comments. So Rachel, we'd be glad to answer questions or open people up however you want to do it.
Can I just make one last comment about mergers, Rachel? I'm sorry. And I think it's so important for board members to recognize that they play a really important leadership role in identifying and pursuing potential strategic partners, that it's not always the staff. And so as board members, so thinking about that, you play a role in identifying and reaching out and helping to negotiate. And with all that's going on right now, the board's role is critical. And hopefully none of your organizations are in the 34% who said that their board was not helping during this crisis. Thanks.
Great, thank you both. And we have had some questions come in. So to start, thinking along the lines of mergers, another word and term that's often been used is an acquisition. So in the nonprofit space, what does that mean and what might that process look like if someone were to consider that? So
a merger is, and it's all completely different than the for-profit sector because there are typically no assets, or it's just two organizations coming together. But an acquisition is really, as it sounds, where the one organization is coming in as a much smaller piece of another organization. Whereas a merger is two coming together, even if they're not the same size, really negotiating it in terms of, bringing board members over, program. Brian, would you say that's the?
Yeah, pretty much, Biz.
The acquisitions where one's really playing the leadership role.
Yeah, I was on the board of YOU, and East City got acquired, really.
Right.
And YOU had 6 major programs. East City was our 7th program. It was this entrepreneurial program, which was great for the youth in high schools because it gave them a vision of what entrepreneurism could be. But it was really an acquisition when you really got down to it. The mergers almost feels to me, it's almost like more equals. And
even if they're not the same size at all, it's still more equal. Yeah. We've done both.
Thank you. An additional question, are you starting to see or hear about boards being asked to step up financially to stabilize current finances through increased donations?
Yes.
Also giving sooner, like depending on what your year is, asking the board instead of waiting till the end of the year to give now and to give more. And it's not, and all the fundraising experts out there are saying, don't shy away from your fundraising. You don't have to make the hard ask, but don't stop asking. So.
Yeah, we just did our board campaign for BVU 4 months earlier than usual. We used to do it in August, and the letter just went out from Bill Premer, our board chair, last week. And he asked for a more substantial gift than what our board's always been generous to us, but he was asking if they could to take it up a notch. And we're hearing that type of theme from many organizations.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of going back to the merger conversation, when there are two organizations that are strong, is there an advantage to considering merging, or would you suggest keeping to more of a benchmarking collaborative relationship?
Because you can evaluate the positives and weaknesses of both of those scenarios, which is what I would do in a feasibility study. If it's two strong organizations, a lot of it depends on the people and the leadership of the board and leadership of the staff and how they're going to come together on that one.
1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2 in terms of funding. So I think there's a lot that you need to evaluate for any organization. Sometimes, other times it just for efficiency and everything else. But many times what happens when two organizations merge is the shell of, if there's one of the organizations that goes away, the shell will stay under the new organization for funding reasons. So it's what was really interesting to me, and there are probably attorneys and accountants on this call who know much more than I do, but I always thought we really needed attorneys to help, but the CPAs are the ones that really help kind of navigate through these negotiations.
And a couple of practical ideas on that scenario. Rachel, would be number one, shared board leadership. Like when CNE and BVU merged, we had co-leaders of all of our committees. We had an Akron leader and a Cleveland leader for every one of our committees. And Deborah Adams Simmons became a vice chair. She was from the CNE board of BVU. That helped a lot.
But Brian, a great example of collaboration would be Destination Cleveland and the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission, where they shared Dave Gilbert. They did not merge. They share space, but the boards are separate, the C3s are separate, and they, reviewed all of that and made the decision that they would not merge, but that they would share the same CEO, which is that incredibly creative solution.
Yeah, there are a lot of different answers, and a lot of you are very senior. You know some of this. The other thing is sub-branding. The two organizations come together. You keep the name of the prior organization leading a program or whatever. So like for BVU, the Center for Nonprofit Excellence was a very good name because of the work it did on the nonprofit, because Business Volunteers Unlimited seems very businessy, which is good. But we kind of split our time between the business side and the nonprofit side. And so we use that CNE name, quite a bit.
So if you're looking at your board and seeking their help, and maybe they're not seeing its responsibility to step up and help, what can be done from the nonprofit leadership side?
I recommend that the chief executive starts with the board chair and just reaches out to the board chair and says, this is, and it's not that the CEOs of our nonprofits aren't doing an amazing job, but it's just, there's just so much more you can do when you kind of get these really smart board members involved in helping you think about it too. So start by reaching out to the board chair and saying, is there more that we could do to engage the board? We need a little more support. And maybe it's around the fundraising. Maybe it's about a committee that's looking at the scenarios. Maybe your finance committee is already doing that. Maybe it's just giving the board members, you start with just saying, let's give everybody an elevator speech and have everybody kind of reach out. And, so there you can take little steps, or you can say, we really need the board to be meeting more often. I like Brian's idea. If they were meeting 6 times a year in the off months, we're just going to do a call. Obviously, the CEO doesn't want to take on more work when they're already crazy busy planning for another board meeting. But I think hopefully the board chairs on this call and in our community are reaching out to their chief executives, and it's going that way. But if not, I think the staff leadership can reach out to the board chair and say, how can we get this terrific group of people more involved? And, all the board members are crazy busy too with their own lives, but with what's going on. But I think as a board member, this is one of your responsibilities right now.
And 2 other things to add to that, Biz, would be the governance committee role. It's critical. You need a senior leader who can help manage the board with the board chair, and having the right people on the governance committee, because the board needs to manage the board, like Biz had said very early on. And that would be important. And the second thing is a board scorecard. Set expectations, manage the board. And I typically, I've been a governance chair for a couple times at different nonprofits. If somebody's not quite stepping up in line with the expectations we have for the board, kind of 1-pager on expectations, the first call is a general call. Hey, see, you haven't been able to do this and this. And the board member is making that call, not the chief executive. And then if they're not able to step up and that continues, then you make a second call. And usually the person resigns at that point. They tend to take themselves out. But having that scorecard and board expectations and a good governance committee help a lot.
Really important. Maybe not acting on the scorecard right now, though. I actually had an organization reach out to me last week where they were following up on their scorecard and got some really negative feedback from board members right now. So I think having that in place is really important, as Brian said, but maybe not following up on it right now.
I think we have time for one more question. So as we look ahead and think about the other side of the pandemic, what do you expect to see in the nonprofit sector as we begin to move beyond this?
Biz, you can give that answer. She knows, Rachel, always let her.
I think we were already getting squeezed before this, actually. I think the foundations, there was some foundation money, the government money, I feel like the nonprofit sector was already getting squeezed. So I think the other side of this might not be so obvious to a lot of us. And so I think it's really going to be important to think about what is the new normal, what is a sustainable organization, and whether it's through collaboration or being really efficient. I mean, some of these organizations, their demand isn't like, look at the food bank, their demand is up tremendously. That's not going to go down overnight. So how do they generate the resources beyond this kind of initial philanthropic push to sustain meeting that need? So I think what I'd love to see is boards getting really strategic and, really partnering with their CEO to be adaptive in their leadership. So they're going to be creating new task forces. They're going to be looking at specific little things the organization can do to be more sustainable. They're going to be doing that evaluation of the programs like I showed. I mean, again, I think every board should know what the revenue model is to sustain, have like a 3 or 4 year forecast based on the scenarios and say, this is what the revenue model we're going to need to have in place to be sustainable, and then figure out how to achieve that revenue model. I think it's going to be hopefully more nimble, less rote, and more strategic leadership. Did that answer that?
That was good. Yeah, nobody knows. Right? I mean, I've seen capital campaigns get shelved, a lot of them, but those will start up at some point in time. It just gets back to the stuff we talked about, Rachel, the sensitivity analysis, monitoring the revenue streams, having your scenarios laid out. And the other thing, frequency of updating these scenarios, where we had 3 scenarios and they're all out the window 3 weeks after we did them. And now we've got 2 new ones. That we're going to keep updating those. And that's pretty much what everybody has to do in view of whatever strategy they're trying to implement. We'll just have to be very nimble, like Biz said.
Well, Brian and Biz, thank you both for sharing your thoughts today. And we had a lot of requests for the PowerPoint to be shared afterwards. Also, some additional questions about mergers. So if you have any resources that we might be able to share with those in attendance, we'd love to be able to share those out. And with that, I am going to turn it back to Marianne for wrap up.
And Rachel, if I can say one more thing, Marianne, before you start, if anyone would like, just give us a call, and we're here to help, serve the boards and the nonprofits. We can talk about mergers. We can talk about board responsibilities, all the stuff you've heard.
Our emails are on the front page of the deck, so you can just email us.
Yeah. Great. Well, Brian and Biz, this was hugely helpful. Thank you so very much. There's a lot of hard work ahead for all of us, whether we serve on nonprofit teams or on boards. And it's just important that, yes, there's got to be collaborations in the nonprofit community, but the most important collaboration is between board and team. And we've just got to keep driving that and moving it forward. So thank you for taking time and for sharing your wisdom in this area. I do want to give a shout out. I see Jason Therian here on the Zoom, who is presenting with us next Wednesday. Sorry, Jason, didn't see you earlier. And if any of the sessions that we presented over the past half dozen weeks, you can find on our website. Many of them were recorded, and you can go there and take a few minutes and view them. We also have some leader lines. Leaders in our community have taken 2 or 3 minutes to make videos talking about how they're navigating through all of this, what are their challenges, and what leadership skills are they calling into play. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope that we will see you on Monday. Thanks again,
Thank you.
Brian.